James Horncastle, a very good morning to you. How are things?
Yeah, very well, thanks.
So Juventus versus Spurs, one of the games of the entire round really in the Champions League tonight, and you were writing in the London Independent this week about Massimiliano Allegri, and he could well have been sitting in the opposition dugout tonight.
Yeah, he could. I mean, after he got sacked by AC Milan in the spring of 2014, he came over to London, spent some time here, took in some games, and was believed to be looking for a job in the Premier League. He's never hidden his desire to try and experience abroad, and at that time, the most likely destination was Spurs, because they got rid of Andre Villas-Boas. Tim Sherwood had come in, and despite his amazing win ratio, which he reminds us of every time he's on TV, Spurs went looking in a different direction, and that was a time when they had Franco Baldini as their sort of technical director. And Baldini's a big admirer of Massimiliano Allegri, but in the end they chose Pochettino, and we've seen Juventus take Allegri instead. So 4.5 years later, these two managers meet in what is a really fascinating Champions League tie.
Absolutely, and I think when you look at the state that Juventus were in, they were obviously in a very good position when Antonio Conte left, but it was more the timing of Conte's departure that people started to panic a little bit. They weren't sure if the Juventus dominance would continue, and it's the way Allegri has managed to preserve that which has got him most of his plaudits.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people associated Juventus' success with Juventus getting back to the top in Serie A with Antonio Conte, and when he resigned, there was a fear that with him, everything that they'd done would go. And instead, Allegri came in and for the first season, sort of didn't change all that much, but had big success. Came within a game of winning the treble. And he's done that twice in the last 3 years. And now this team very much is Allegri's team. I think, with the exception of Buffon, Chiellini, Barzagli and Marchisio, it's a completely different side that plays in a different way. And I think some Chelsea fans will be familiar with the experience that Juventus fans went through in that summer at this moment in time, with Conte having some of the same differences of opinion, let's say, with the hierarchy at Chelsea, which have obviously led to doubts about his own future at Stamford Bridge.
Yeah, we might come back to that a little bit later on in this piece, James, but just in terms of Conte and the transition to Allegri, I would imagine it's quite pleasurable for a Juventus fan to look at their European record over the last couple of seasons, because you've got that now infamous quote from Antonio Conte that winning the Champions League is like walking into a restaurant with a tenner, but dinner costs 100 quid per head. And Allegri's brought them to 2 Champions League finals, and Conte looks a tad silly as a result of that. But then you look at the man in the opposition dugout tonight, and Maurizio Pochettino, and what he's also been able to do with relatively limited resources.
Exactly. Conte, who is always clamouring for his owners to back him in the transfer market and spend big. We've heard him in the last week say he's a disaster at persuading owners to do that. Well, these guys have shown that you don't need big budgets, relatively speaking, to be competitive in the Champions League and to actually do better than he did whilst he was at Juventus. I remember when he was still working in Turin, he would often use the same sort of line of argument when it came to excusing, for example, going out in the quarterfinals to Bayern Munich and then going out in the group stages, that those teams had a lot more money than Juventus did at the time. But in that period, you saw Atletico Madrid reach the final. You saw Borussia Dortmund reach the final. Those are clubs that have similar budgets to Juventus at the time and Juventus now, and also Spurs as well. So, again, that is why there'll be another eye on what Conte does in the Champions League this year. I mean, that is where he has to prove himself.
Is Allegri the type of character who just puts the head down and gets on with things? During summers, during transfer windows, he's lost a huge amount of players over the 2-3 seasons in charge, from Pirlo, Vidal, Pogba, Morata, through to Bonucci and Alves from the team that got to the Champions League final last season. Does he ever let his frustration at losing those players show?
No. Yeah, he's an excellent company man without being a yes man. He's someone who accepts that his role is to coach the team, and he'll give their sporting director indications as to kind of the profile of the player that they want. But if they can't get him, he's not going to go out there and complain about it to the media and wash his dirty linen out in public. And that's very much the model at Juventus. They've had to sell some of their best players in order to compete regularly and strengthen the squad. Their squad now is so deep that even with the injuries that they have tonight, they can put out a very competitive first team. But I think this is a very underrated skill in managers. That was one of the reasons why Sir Alex Ferguson is held in such high regard, because of that ability to rebuild every 2 or 3 years. I think it's something that Allegri's done very well, and it's something that Simeone continues to do very well at Atletico Madrid.
Maurizio Pochettino said that characteristic of having that flexibility is something they have in common, the two managers. The team and the setup that they will go into tonight's game, Juventus, probably a world away from when Allegri took over the side, a 4-3-3 system, conceded just 1 goal in 16 games. What was it about their form at the start of the season that forced them into that change?
Well, they were conceding too many goals, which always makes Juventus uncomfortable, because even though they look to add skilled players who can score a lot of goals, Higuain last season, Douglas Costa, Federico Bernardeschi this season, Juventus always say that it's in their DNA to win games, by a goal to nil, rather than look to get into a shootout like you see the Spanish clubs do and win games 5-3. So that's what they were doing at the start of the season. They were scoring a lot of goals, but they didn't have control of games. And since they lost to Sampdoria away in sort of mid-November, they said enough is enough. They put an extra man in midfield, which was Blaise Matuidi, who's not going to be available for them tonight. And they've really locked down that defence. They've only conceded, as you mentioned, 1 goal in 16 games. In some of those, they haven't even conceded a single shot on target, which is pretty extraordinary, really. And it's keeping them competitive in the league, because Juventus go into this game second in Serie A, which again is not something that you associate with them, particularly over the last 6 years where they've won the league every year. And they're still 2 points better off than last year, which really goes to show how good and how competitive a title race there is in Italy at the moment, particularly in comparison with England, Germany, Spain and France, where everyone else is running away with it.
We've mentioned the sliding doors moment essentially earlier on with Allegri, but there seems to be one with Miralem Pjanic as well, and the way he was looked at from a Spurs point of view to potentially replace Luka Modric when he went to Real Madrid. But instead, he's still at Juventus. And is it fair to say now that instead of becoming the next Luka Modric, he's on this route to becoming the next Andrea Pirlo?
Yeah, I think, look, when Pirlo left to go and play in New York, they didn't replace him. And they missed having someone with that sort of sense of invention in midfield. Now, when Pjanic was signed from Roma, there was this idea that he was going to start playing in front of the defence, but he didn't look comfortable doing it. Often he was caught out on the ball, he didn't think quick enough, and they ended up playing either sort of in a midfield 3 or a midfield 2. So he had that little bit more protection. But this season, you can see he's a lot more confident doing that, and he is playing as a regista, as they say in Italy, that director of play. And he's really come on under Allegri. There was a time when he used to love taking too many touches, would play sideways passes. Now he's really mixing it up, plays forward a lot, plays long in the style of Pirlo. And of course, the big comparison that there's always going to be between him and Il Maestro is his free kick taking ability. He's one of the best in the world when it comes to scoring from free kicks. Juventus, to be fair, have a luxury in that role. We saw their big signing Federico Bernardeschi score from a free kick in the win against Fiorentina at the weekend. Dybala can do that when he's fit, but he's missing tonight. But yeah, Pjanic is I think remains one of those playmakers that still gets a little bit overlooked on the continent, but is very talented.
It might sound ridiculous considering they've only conceded 1 goal in their last 16 games, but tonight against Spurs and the way Spurs set up with the 3 players, Eriksen, Ali and Heung-min Son playing in behind Harry Kane, and Juventus going with that 4-3-3 formation, is there a possibility they could be overrun by those 3-4 attacking Spurs players?
I think it's going to be a really interesting battle in midfield. I know a lot of the focus in the media last few days has been on Kane and Higuain, who are in great form. But I think from a Juventus point of view, they look at Matuidi's absence as being a big one, because Matuidi has so much energy, can cover a lot of ground, and allows Juventus to be at their best in defence, where he can basically screen that back line, but also in attack, because he gives someone like Sami Khedira the freedom to go forward, break into the box and score goals. Khedira's got 6 this season. And when Juventus have lost this year, it's tended to be when they haven't been able to get control of midfield, and they've allowed the opponent's sort of 10s and wingers to have freedom, much more freedom in the final third between the lines. And so that'll be a real moment of concern. I think Chiellini, in his press conference yesterday, was asked about that sort of battle that he's going to have with Kane, and he says it's not about Kane, it's about Juventus against Tottenham. It's not about stopping one man, we have to stop them as a whole. So I think that is definitely going to be very interesting to see how two teams that, to be honest, are very, I'd say, quite similar, and it's to Spurs' immense credit that they go into this game, and it feels quite even though Juventus have been to 2 Champions League finals in the last 3 years.
The one last thing on Spurs and the absence of Toby Alderweireld. I'm not sure what you think in terms of how big a loss this is. Like, if he was available, do you reckon Mauricio Pochettino might have gone back to that back 3, which seemed to be so effective against Real Madrid?
I think both of these managers, as Pochettino said, love to have flexibility. And we talked about Juventus being in this 4-3-3. I think some of the injuries that they've had going into this game, Barzagli, Cuadrado, might not catch the eye, but they're really important for him because they allow Massimiliano Allegri the freedom to change in-game to a back 3. And I think that's what Toby Alderweireld, being fit and being in the squad and in Turin, would have done for Spurs, because it's a hell of an advantage if you, say, get an away goal, playing as they are at the moment, to then be able to go and play with a back 3 and completely shut up shop. So that is going to be a miss. And Alderweireld's a big part of their build-up play as well. Those sort of big diagonal passes that he plays, out to the wing, allow them to beat the press. Because I think it is going to be a very aggressive game for them tonight, where Juventus, particularly in the first 15, 20 minutes, will really have a go at Spurs. The Allianz Stadium isn't the biggest, it's 41,000, but it's one of the loudest, it's one of the most intense atmospheres that you actually will find, which might come as a surprise to Spurs. So, I think not having that option will be a bit of a shame for Pochettino.
On Basel versus Manchester City then, James, Pep Guardiola today has been a little bit more coy than Vincent Kompany in terms of Manchester City's chances in going all the way in the competition. Perhaps that's just a little bit of the ghost of Monaco from last season haunting him. But Leroy Sané is fit. That's a huge addition to them, even just going ahead and building up that flexibility in the team once again, where Sané is fully bedded back into the team. They will beat Basel, you would suspect. But in terms of the general landscape in Europe, how high up the pecking order are Manchester City?
Well, they're the favourites for the competition. I think everyone expects this to be an unprecedented season for City, where they realise the dreams of the owners in Abu Dhabi, where this project not necessarily comes to its completion, but to its fulfilment. Because I think most people would agree that City sort of play the best football in Europe, play a very innovative style, which again we associate with Pep Guardiola, and have the budget and the depth to go all the way. And we saw that in the January transfer window. You mentioned Kompany, they bring in Aymeric Laporte. They don't seem to have a problem paying 60 million for him when they didn't want to pay 20, 25 for Alexis Sanchez. I think City have so many weapons. It's very difficult to see them at least not getting to the final. I think, of course, a lot of things need to go their way, but they seem to just have so much about them that I think their time is now, and they've earned the right to get this favourable draw in the round of 16 against Basel, considering how almost perfect they were in the group stages. So I think they'll probably look at this game, no disrespect to Basel, in the same way as they did the Wolves and Bristol City games. Which, if there's any kind of complacency, it might be a little bit closer than we expect. But City should be able to comprehensively beat them.
Just a word on Antonio Conte and his future. This time last week, it almost felt like there was an inevitability that he was going to end up leaving Chelsea quite quickly. now that storm seems to have passed, they had a comfortable win last night, and that Champions League game with Barcelona is coming on the horizon very quickly. Is your sense now that he's there till the end of the season?
Well, look, I mean, this is going to be a very delicate period for Chelsea because they've got the Champions League ties against Barcelona, and in between them, they've got trips to Manchester to play City and United. So, I think the win that they had last night against West Brom is to not a reprieve, but it's the calm before the storm. I think with Conte, look, he has resigned from positions in the past. We spoke about that at Juventus. He did it at Atalanta as well. I think this time there's a lot more money on the table, which he would have to walk away from, which you could probably imagine him not being too keen to do. And from Chelsea's point of view, sacking him means paying a lot of money, and right now, is there anyone better on the market to bring in now? I don't think there is. I think to some extent, the end game that is foreseeable is they go to the end of the season, and Conte gets a big offer. He walks away. Chelsea don't have to pay compensation, and everybody's kind of happy from it. I think some of the options that were there for Conte in the past, AC Milan, not as attractive as they were, say, at the start of the season when they were spending €220 million. They've had a very difficult year and will probably come under financial fair play sanction. Does he want to go straight back into the Italy job? They'll want to have a conversation with him, but I think he has other career goals at this moment in time. I think what's really interesting is Real Madrid PSG. I mean, the outcome of that could have as much of a bearing on Conte's sort of mid-term future than what happens between Chelsea and Barcelona.
Do you think Chelsea as a football club, James, are in a much weaker position now than they were in the past when they've always been going through this flux of managers really during the Abramovich era, but at least in the past they had the dressing room leaders of John Terry and Frank Lampard, and there was a certain uniformity to the dressing room mood, I'd imagine, when they were in the camp. But now it's hard to point out who is the John Terry or who is the Frank Lampard that will keep the dressing room somewhat serene when there's the madness going on in the boardroom.
Yeah, I think that there is an element of truth into that. I think this is very different to what happened a couple of years ago with Jose Mourinho, because these players are behind Antonio Conte. We're not having the quote-unquote palpable discord that was there then. It's more of a disconnect between Conte and the board when it comes to recruitment, because he thought his hand would be strengthened last year by winning the league against all odds. Everyone at the start of the season thought it was going to be about Mourinho. They thought it was going to be about Pep. And instead, he doesn't feel that he's got his sort of top targets signed. So Chelsea, look, they've normalised change. They've even been able to be successful doing that throughout the entire Abramovich era. I just think Chelsea now are in a different stage. They're having to fund and build a new stadium, which even for someone of Abramovich's wealth is very expensive to do in West London. He is someone who has his own personal wealth. He doesn't have the wealth of a state behind him in the way that, say, Man City and Paris Saint-Germain do. So, Conte complains about, joining these big clubs when they're in moments of, I think you used the word carestia in Italian, which it can be translated as famine. Which is a bit rich, really, compared, when you still look at what Chelsea have spent over the last two windows. But of course, that pales in comparison with what the Manchester clubs have done in the same period.
Yeah, for sure. James Horncastle, thanks a million for taking the call and enjoy the football tonight.
Pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Hey, hope you enjoyed that. Let us off.